If it's Monday, one day more, it's a two-person race heading into New Hampshire tomorrow. With DeSantis out, Nikki Haley tries to avoid a knockout blow from the formidable frontrunner. Plus, disinformation on the trail. The White House and the New Hampshire Attorney General respond to a robocall using fake audio of President Biden telling Democrats to stay home and not vote in tomorrow's contest. And the Biden administration marks the 51st anniversary of the now overturned Roe v. Wade decision as the president's allies look to renew the fight over abortion rights and make the issue a centerpiece of the 2024 campaign. Hello and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington. And it's New Hampshire primary eve. And the two-person race Nikki Haley had been hoping for all campaign has finally materialized. This after Florida Governor Ron DeSantis suspended his campaign yesterday, throwing his support behind the frontrunner Donald Trump and taking one final shot at Haley.
Well, I've had disagreements with Donald Trump, such as on the coronavirus pandemic and his elevation of Anthony Fauci. Trump is superior to the current incumbent, Joe Biden. That is clear. I signed a pledge to support the Republican nominee, and I will honor that pledge. He has my endorsement because we can't go back to the old Republican guard of yesteryear, a repackaged form of warmed-over corporatism that Nikki Haley represents.
And the Republican Party is increasingly coalescing around Trump. His one-time campaign rivals, DeSantis, Doug Burgum, Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, they've all now thrown their support behind Trump and not Haley. Steve Daines, the Republican senator in charge of getting more Republicans elected to the Senate this November, he even called Trump the presumptive nominee, and he's urging the party to unite behind him. Even South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who was so critical of the former president after January 6th, that she had to seek Nikki Haley's help to fend off a Trump-backed effort to oust her from Congress, today announced her endorsement of Donald Trump. The latest Boston Globe NBC 10 Suffolk University poll out of New Hampshire has Haley trailing the former president by double digits. And Mr. Trump is clearly trying to put her away as he touts the recent flood of endorsements.
You know, Vivek just came with us. And now Ron just came with us. They're all coming with us. They're all coming. Senator Tim Scott, what a good guy. He came with us. From the same state, South Carolina, as Nikki. The people behind Nikki are pro-amnesty. You like that? Pro-China, pro-open borders, pro-war, pro-deep state, and they're pro-Biden.
Now, as for Haley, she's making several stops across New Hampshire today, keeping up her fight against the former president.
America doesn't do coronations. We believe in choices. We believe in democracy, and we believe in freedom. Every single thing that Donald Trump has said or put on TV has been a lie. Check with the fact checkers. Every single thing. When you hear Trump speak, what's he talking about? Grievances? The past? He's talking about vendettas? Today he's in court? Biden's talking about investigations? Neither one of them is talking about the future.
And it's not an exaggeration to say that tomorrow's New Hampshire primary is a race to keep the race going. And we'll see tomorrow if Haley can live to fight another day. NBC's Ali Vitale is covering the Haley campaign. She's in Salem, New Hampshire. NBC's Garrett Hake is covering the Trump campaign in Hollis, New Hampshire. And NBC's Steve Kornacki is at the big board. So, Ali, let's start with you. Nikki Haley finally got the two-person race that she's wanted, but maybe not in this form because the field really coalescing around Trump, not her. I know you talked to Nikki Haley today. What have you heard from her just one day from this New Hampshire primary?
Yeah, Ryan, I don't think that this is the iteration of the two-person race that Nikki Haley would have wanted, given the fact, of course, that most of her rivals have dropped out and now endorsed her key rival, Donald Trump. But what I asked Haley when I spoke with her just in the last few minutes was, how do you keep going, and what does a win look like in New Hampshire when you're coming in second, most likely, out of two people? Haley, of course, arguing that her only metric for success here was to do better than she did in Iowa. Certainly second will be better than third. But when it's out of two people, it's really difficult, I think, for people to see that as a win. And then, of course, there's the question of South Carolina. Listen to what she said about her home state. Are you going to win South Carolina?
Our goal, I've been consistent saying this, I want to be strong in Iowa. I want to get stronger in
New Hampshire. How do you get the nomination if you don't win a state outright?
Because I don't think it's not just about 3 states. Then you go on to Super Tuesday. This is a process. If you go in history, this process plays out. Why is this any different? Why should we assume, oh, this time we have to have Biden and Trump? That's not fair to the American people. More people deserve to be able to vote. And I'm going to give them that option.
So look, Nikki Haley there saying that she's not just staying in through New Hampshire and her home state of South Carolina. And of course, you got to remember, Nevada is sandwiched in there between those two dates as well. But she's also saying she's going to go all the way through to Super Tuesday. I think that's really notable. Of course, everything is true about staying in until it's not. We certainly heard Ron DeSantis sounding notes of optimism about remaining in this field until he decided he was going to drop out. But the other thing that you mentioned there in your introduction, Ryan, was the fact that the endorsements have not been falling Haley's way. And I asked her about the fact that she elevated Senator Tim Scott to the Senate in 2012. She showed up for Nancy Mace in 2022 in Nancy Mace's swingy House seat. What was happening? And also Marco Rubio, she endorsed him in 2016 to much fanfare in the Palmetto State. I asked her what was happening with these so-called friends of hers that she showed up for them politically, and they're now backing Donald Trump. Haley said that she's always been someone who goes against the establishment from her early days in the race. But of course, that is in sharp contrast to the way that Trump and his allies are trying to paint her now, Ryan.
Yeah, that Nancy Mace endorsement in particular, particularly eyebrow raising. Ali Vitale, thank you for putting it all together for us. So let's move now to you, Garrett. This is about 3 years after January 6th and a little more than a year from their disappointing 2022 midterms. But Donald Trump appears to have gotten the full Republican Party on board. So many saying that they needed to go in a different direction. It doesn't look like they want to go in that different direction now. Is he looking at New Hampshire as being the final blow?
Yeah, Ryan, look, if you take enough new turns as a party, you end up right back where you started, and that seems to be the case for Republicans right now, who are coalescing again around Nikki Haley. Now, the difference here is his campaign understands they're not going to have the delegates to be the presumptive nominee until sometime in March. Steve will probably correct me, but I think Trump has something like 11 delegates right now from what he won in Iowa. That doesn't get you there, so he's not actually that close to capturing the nomination. But Donald Trump, does believe, it appears, that he's on the cusp of knocking Nikki Haley out of this race. He seemed to suggest as much in an interview with Newsmax this morning, that aired this morning. Listen to this.
If you go on to win Tuesday, will you call for Nikki Haley to drop out of this race?
Well, I would never call for it, but perhaps she should. Maybe she'll drop out on Tuesday. Let's see what happens. I mean, I hear we have very good numbers in Iowa. Remember, she came in third.
And it's striking, Ryan, because I'm at a Donald Trump Jr. event just now, and to hear his tone towards Nikki Haley, who's obviously still in this race, challenging his father, versus his tone towards Ron DeSantis. Well, I was at a Trump Jr. event a week and a half ago or so in Iowa. It was very aggressive, making fun of Ron DeSantis, using all of his father's favorite nicknames. But now that DeSantis is back in the fold, it's like everything is forgotten. The MAGA faithful will welcome you back in. And that seems to be the part of the message, at least, that Donald Trump and his campaign are putting out there now just to Haley. The party's going this way. Do you want to come back in and be everybody's friend, or do you want to be on the outside as a quote-unquote rhino? And I think you're going to see them banging that drum both here in New Hampshire and with South Carolina surrogates in New Hampshire and in South Carolina over the last month, should Nikki Haley choose to stick it out and keep fighting beyond tomorrow night.
And of course, Trump can't escape his legal issues. They had a cancellation today because of COVID that scrapped his plans to testify in court today during his defamation case. Instead, he's just basically spent the day posting online. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it clearly frustrates Donald Trump personally. You know, there's no secret code to what Donald Trump is thinking. There never has been. And it's almost always just appeared on his social media feed. And that's certainly been the case today, where he's posted dozens of times about the E. Jean Carroll case, mostly, you know, reposting old comments from her, mocking her, arguably continuing to defame her in the manner in which he's been found liable in the past. So it's clear that that case bothers him on a personal level. But from a political level, it doesn't appear to be any consequences that he or his campaign have suffered. He's in just as strong of a place in the polls now as he was back in the spring. Really, when he was first indicted in New York was when he broke away from Ron DeSantis in the first place. And even if he's not able, or chooses, I should say, not to campaign here tomorrow, to instead attend that trial if it resumes tomorrow, I don't necessarily even see that working against him. He didn't campaign in Iowa on caucus day. You know, other than making brief appearances at some of these polling places, there's not significant voter-moving efforts that happen on primary days or election days. It's a little bit of GOTV, where most campaigns just prefer to have their staff focused on turnout, not the candidate. And so we may see little to no effect from this particular legal problem tomorrow, Ryan.
All right, and Garrett, I look forward to the bottle of wine you're bringing back for the Senate booth from that event you're at when you come back to town.
Red or white, Ryan?
We'll see. I want you to surprise me. Thank you. All right, I appreciate it, Garrett. Now, Steve, let's go to you. You're looking at every angle of the New Hampshire primary, as you always do. But first things first, let's talk about the role DeSantis' exit could potentially play here. There really aren't a lot of DeSantis voters in New Hampshire, right? But could they play some sort of a role tomorrow?
Yeah, they could. I mean, we got a little bit of insight from our tracking poll NBC 10's doing with Suffolk University. Every night they are doing a poll there in New Hampshire, and they took one last night after the DeSantis news. This is the result they got. Trump 57, Haley 38. You showed it just a minute ago. And to put this in context, this is what the tracking poll has looked like for the past week. You see, coming right out of Iowa, Trump started at 50. He has moved up 7 points in the last week. Haley started at 34. It's bounced around a little bit. She's come up 4 points in the last week. In other words, Trump in this tracking poll at least has gained more since Iowa than Haley has. You see where DeSantis was running kind of very, very also ran here in New Hampshire. So he was getting 6% the last time he was polled. The spread was 19 points, Trump over Haley. They take DeSantis out. The spread still 19 points, Trump over Haley. So, you know, look, polls have been showing DeSantis voters' second choice is a lot more likely to be Trump than Haley. So you figure that redounds to Trump's benefit in some way. But you have to wonder, I think, is the bigger benefit to Trump actual voters he picks up from the DeSantis column, or is the benefit that after winning Iowa so big, after getting all these other endorsements for the week, that basically on the eve of the New Hampshire primary, or 2 nights before, you get the news filled with a Trump rival dropping out and endorsing him? Does it create a sense of inevitability? Does it create a sense among Republicans of, all right, this thing's basically winding up, let's get on board, just as Trump is calling for all of his opponents to get on board? Does this bring kind of Republicans who are kind of in the middle into the Trump side at the end, just by generating the kind of news that DeSantis did? Because take a look, when you look deeper inside this Suffolk poll here, again, Trump up 19 overall. Look at this chasm. Among Republicans in the poll, Trump absolutely crushing Nikki Haley. The reason why she's still, I mean, it's a big gap there, but the reason why it's only a 19-point gap is that among independents, who are going to make up 40% plus of the electorate tomorrow in New Hampshire on the Republican side, Haley's actually in this poll winning and winning big. Now, what she would need to do to actually pull off the upset tomorrow, this margin among Republicans, among independents, she'd have to drive it up even more. The all-time biggest margin on the Republican side among independents, John McCain, 2000, he won him by 42 points. Haley's going to need a McCain-like number among independents. That would get her a lot closer to Trump. And then simply, she's going to lose, by all measures, the Republican segment of the vote in the primary tomorrow. She can't lose it like this. She's got to get that Republican support up to 30%, 35%, somewhere in that area, if she's actually going to have a chance at pulling off a win in this primary. So you see where the big weakness is, you see where the clear opportunity is, but that is a lot of ground to make up in the final hours of this campaign. I guess if the Haley campaign has one precedent to cling to, 2008, Democratic side, Clinton versus Obama. All of the polls on the eve of that primary had Obama up generally by double digits. Clinton won the primary.
So there's a path. Might be a small one, but there is a path. So it bears watching. All right, Steve Kornacki, thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. And joining me now for some more insight on the New Hampshire primary is Boston Globe political reporter James Pindell. He's, of course, an NBC News contributor. James, so great to talk to you. And very few people know as much about the New Hampshire primary as you. So let's start with the action over the last couple of days. Ron DeSantis out. He's backing Trump. As are most of the leading conservatives. Does this really move the needle at all in New Hampshire?
I mean, obviously, it makes it even more difficult for Nikki Haley to close the gap. I mean, look, she was trying to argue this is a two-person race long before Ron DeSantis even left the contest. And obviously, if you look at the second choice for DeSantis voters, it goes back to Trump, just as DeSantis went back to Trump. You know, Ryan, in Iowa, we talked about the dropping temperatures. Here it's about the dropping candidates and maybe even the dropping notion that there would be any significant challenge to Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that at this stage there's only two candidates left. We always talk about this, but to actually be in this position is unique, especially at the stage of New Hampshire. And you know, New Hampshire is unique. You know this better than anyone because of the factor that independents can play in this election. And, you know, there have been enough unaffiliated voters in New Hampshire to try and close the gap, even if there aren't necessarily enough Republicans to win a primary. Will there be enough independent or unaffiliated voters for Nikki Haley to pull a surprise tomorrow?
Well, look, I mean, if you look at the poll numbers, her gap among those independents, even if there is a large number, may not be enough. But here's the thing, is it's really hard to square, Ryan. The atmosphere here is not very exciting. There are very few events. There are very small crowd sizes. Obviously, Nikki Haley started to get a little bit more, including last night with 1,000 people. But the baseline for a New Hampshire primary event in the week of the New Hampshire primary is like 2,000, 2,500 people. That's not what's happening. We have to square what one analyst called the most boring New Hampshire primary of his life with the fact that those who are closely watching absentee ballot, requests and others believe this could be a record-setting turnout tomorrow. And if it's a record-setting turnout, it's because those independent voters are voting.
That's a great point. So Nikki Haley does have the state's popular governor on her side, and Governor Sununu, a major endorsement from the newspaper there, the Union Leader, which typically has a pretty big influence on this primary. She also really does well with independents, but there's still a chance that she may lose. Does this show just how unique the impact that Donald Trump has on the Republican Party right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is his party. I mean, Nikki Haley, said earlier in the interview at the top of the hour that if you look at history, this process plays out. Well, yeah. Also, if you look at history, literally no Republican since the beginning of Iowa and New Hampshire in 1976 has won both Iowa and New Hampshire. Now it would be Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. And she could try to continue her campaign. But here's the deal, Ryan. No one drops out because they lose states or because they've had enough. They drop out because they're broke. So her number one challenge is to spin anything tomorrow into some ability to go on to the next day. And remember, we don't talk about this enough. The South Carolina primary is at 31 days. We've never had that large of a gap in the history of these early states. That's got a lot of time for her both to get momentum and to go especially broke.
Okay, it could go one way or the other. All right, James Pindell, thank you so much for your insight and analysis. We appreciate it. Coming up, write-ins and robocalls. We'll have the very latest developments in New Hampshire's Democratic primary race amid new disinformation concerns. Plus, it's Election Day Eve, and our friend and NBC chief political analyst Chuck Todd has been catching up with New Hampshire voters as they prepare to hit the polls tomorrow. Take a listen.
What's different this time, Dee?
I'm confused. I just don't understand where my party is right now.
Do you feel like you've lost, that you're a man without a party?
I'm trying to keep my head above water. And I will always be a Republican. But I am slowly losing my party, and I want to know how I can get it back.
You can catch more of Chuck's reporting tonight on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. We'll be right back with more Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As New Hampshire residents prepare to vote in tomorrow's primary, some residents are receiving deceptive messages not to cast their ballots. NBC News was the first to report that some New Hampshire Democrats received a robocall from a voice claiming to be President Biden, but was not, in fact, the president, telling them not to vote.
We know the value of voting Democratic when our votes count. It's important that you save your vote for the November election. We'll need your help in electing Democrats up and down the ticket. Voting this Tuesday only enables the Republicans in their quest to elect Donald Trump again. Your vote makes a difference in November, not this Tuesday.
Sure sounds a lot like him, but that's fake, and it's a call that the New Hampshire Attorney General's office said could be the work of AI. And it's being condemned by local election officials, law enforcement, the Biden campaign, and organizers of a campaign to write in President Biden's name tomorrow. That effort, which is not affiliated with the Biden campaign, stems from the fact that Biden's name won't be on the ballot after the DNC stripped the Granite State of its first-in-the-nation primary status. Still, the president's supporters, like New Hampshire Senator Maggie Hassan, are urging Democrats to turn out tomorrow, even if the contest won't factor in to the nominating process.
Write-in campaigns are notoriously difficult, right? So what's important here is just what the grassroots effort you're seeing on the ground, the engagement. The DNC made a terrible decision not to have New Hampshire go first. But at the end of the day, Granite Staters know that the stakes are really, really high in this election. And so I feel very good about the write-in campaign that we have.
We'll have more on the fallout from that fake Biden robocall in just a moment and what it says about the evolving threat of election year disinformation. But first, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli has more on the Biden write-in campaign.
It was South Carolina that created the path to the White House for Joe Biden and me.
This year, it's South Carolina that will hold the first official Democratic primary. New Hampshire is defying the party, meaning candidates can't earn any delegates here. And President Biden will not be on the ballot.
I think we still do have first in the nation because we are going to write Biden's name in.
Now, a grassroots write-in Biden effort is underway to save the president the embarrassment of losing in the Granite State.
Why are you so involved and so engaged in trying to support him, even if he's not on the ballot?
Well, first of all, I don't blame him. It's a committee in Washington, D.C. that voters here don't care about.
With very little money and even less time, Democratic organizers are waging a campaign without a candidate, holding house parties, waving signs, and training volunteers.
What does success look like for the president on Tuesday, right? We can play the expectations game. Does he need a majority? Does he need 50%? What do you think?
I think he needs to win, and I think he will win.
New Hampshire's Secretary of State is predicting low Democratic turnout, but warns counting the votes will still take time.
There's always a lot of write-in votes cast every 4 years in the presidential primary ballot, but it seems to be, it's safe to say that this time is going to be different.
This time is going to be different because there is a major candidate whose name does not appear on the ballot.
A major candidate, the President of the United States.
That would be true, yeah. But there are many write-in votes in a typical election, so this is not an unusual exercise for the local election officials.
A late wild card, progressives urging critics of President Biden's support for Israel to write in ceasefire.
If a voter writes in ceasefire on the ballot, that ballot will be counted as a vote for ceasefire. I think that the moderators are aware that that effort is going on, so I would expect that they'll keep track of those votes.
Biden supporters say they think their message is getting out in time for the vote.
This is a unique challenge now to organize a write-in campaign.
I've seen it change over the last month or so. People at first were, no way, he abandoned us, no way. And in the last week or so, people are now saying, yeah, that's probably what I'm going to do.
But Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips, who is on the ballot, hoping to give frustrated Democrats here a chance to send a message to the president.
Some of you here are probably part of the write-in Biden campaign. God bless you. You can do what you want. I'm not here to change your mind, but I am here to offer a new perspective.
And Mike Memoli joins us now, as well as NBC cybersecurity reporter Kevin Collier. Mike, let's start with you. Are Democrats a little worried that this write-in campaign could be a little too divisive for the party?
Well, what's so interesting about this, Ryan, is it was about a year ago that the DNC tried to drive a stake in the heart of the New Hampshire primary with that new calendar. And some of the loudest voices, some of the staunchest critics of that move were the New Hampshire delegation. Annie Kuster, who you saw in that piece, Maggie Hassan, who you saw earlier. Well, look at those same Democrats who have now rallied behind the president to try to encourage this write-in effort. There's a little bit of self-interest here. This is an investment in 2028 to try to get the DNC to reward New Hampshire again. But the concern among other Democrats who've, let's say, been less public about this write-in campaign is that we're going to see in 2024 what happened in 1968, that the candidate not on the ballot, the president not on the ballot, will have a disappointing showing. Will be under 50%. Will be, maybe it's not Dean Phillips, but maybe it's the cumulative Democratic vote that falls short, just short of President Biden. And then it just reinforces the doubts about whether Biden should be leading the ticket again. And so that's why we're going to be looking maybe not at an interesting Republican primary result tomorrow so much, and following the results coming in throughout the state in the Democratic primary as the first real gauge of President Biden's political strength heading into the general election.
Yeah, primaries are often about expectations, and if he falls short of those expectations, it could end up being a loss even if he ultimately wins. Kevin, let's turn to you now and talk about this robocall with the fake Biden audio that certainly sounds authentic. I mean, what do we know about it, and how much concern is there about future fake robocalls?
You know, I've spoken all day today with AI and disinformation experts, and they're pretty resounding. There's not an exact way to say for absolute certainty that this was a voice cloning AI program, but they're pretty confident it was. These things are so cheap. They're so easy to find, even for free online. It's just kind of a given, I think, in all their minds that this is going to be something we're going to see more and more and more of throughout the election from now until November. The FEC, I was checking with them today. They have no role. They haven't even decided yet if they're going to create a rulemaking process prohibiting deepfakes in political campaigning.
And I would imagine that even if they are, you talk about whether or not there should be a penalty for this, but won't it be very difficult to even track down who's responsible for putting the call out?
Yeah, it's an absolute morass. There is a movement, of course, to get the major AI companies to watermark their products, to say, like, hey, this is a way that we can tell that this was artificially generated. But not everybody follows that. This doesn't exist right now. And there's plenty of, third-party, homemade AI services. The cat's already out of the bag.
Mm-hmm. So, Mike, how's the Biden campaign reacting to all of this?
Well, Ryan, it was interesting. Obviously, we broke this story. And so when I approached the Biden campaign at first, there was some hesitation about whether to respond. The reason being, they've been so reluctant to talk about anything that has to do with the New Hampshire primary because they're looking ahead. But we did ultimately, after our story posted, hear from the campaign manager, Julie Chavez Rodriguez, and in a statement, she said that spreading disinformation to suppress voting and deliberately undermine free and fair elections will not stand. And fighting back against any attempt to undermine our democracy will continue to be a top priority of this campaign. Now, compare that statement to what we heard from Dean Phillips's campaign, a spokesperson saying that any effort to discourage voters will be unacceptable. And that is part of actually what has been Dean Phillips's message here, because he's arguing what the DNC has tried to do by undermining New Hampshire's primary here has itself been a form of voter suppression. Of course, really unclear if this is going to affect the turnout. The Secretary of State was already predicting only about 88,000 Democratic votes here cast. Compare that to over 22,000 on the Republican side, a big disparity, even more so than you usually would see in an incumbent year for the party in power.
Yeah, I imagine that's part of why that robocall was effective, because it was a message that Democrats were talking about just a couple of months ago. Don't participate in the New Hampshire primary. And now with this write-in campaign, that's changed a little bit. So, Kevin, back to you. I mean, how much do we expect to see this kind of thing this year? And is there really anything that states or federal governments can do right now to prevent this from happening again between now and November?
In a word, no. There's no meaningful regulation on the horizon that would regulate the entire industry. Specific companies, maybe somewhat. There's not really much any state can do. Like I said, the FEC is not even begun to decide whether or not they would have a rulemaking process for this. So no, this is wide open.
Almost like a shrug emoji. That's all we can do when it comes to this. And this is going to be a massive issue heading in to the November election. Thank you guys both for that reporting. We appreciate it. Up next, nearly 7 months, more than $50 million, and just one primary contest later, we're taking you inside the rise and demise of Governor Ron DeSantis' presidential bid. You're watching Meet the Press now.
You can be the most worthless Republican in America, but if you kiss the ring, he'll say you're wonderful. With Trump, all he cares about, I mean, if you kiss his ring, you can be the worst Republican in the world and he'll love you.
And it's almost like with Donald Trump, if you don't kiss the ring, you could be the best governor ever and he'll trash you. You could be a terrible, corrupt politician, but if you kiss his ring, then all of a sudden he'll praise you.
Welcome back. That, of course, was Florida Governor Ron DeSantis with perhaps prophetic comments from the campaign trail before dropping out of the race. Because after painting Trump as ineffectual with too much legal baggage, well, DeSantis endorsed him yesterday. One might say he kissed the ring while attacking the Trump resistance. Trump reacted to DeSantis' endorsement by calling him, quote, a really terrific person because he kissed the ring. Joining me now is Dasha Burns, who's been following the DeSantis campaign. So, Dasha, I guess maybe we're not that surprised to be here at this stage, but he really started out his campaign with a lot of energy. He had that botched launch on Twitter Spaces. That seemed to be the first stumble. Was he ever really able to recover from that?
Well, look, Ryan, that first stumble wasn't in the vacuum. It was a symptom of the broader infrastructure or sort of lack thereof that he had. Look, this is a governor and his team, the first lady, who decided to empower folks to run his campaign that didn't have experience running presidential campaigns. They chose to empower those who were loyal to them rather than those who knew how to do this at a national level. They only really knew how to do it at the Florida gubernatorial level, and that led to, a campaign that ran out of money last summer. That led to a whole lot of drama between the campaign and the super PAC that they built this very unconventional and frankly legally questionable relationship with, where the super PAC was taking on the bulk of the campaign, typical campaign responsibilities. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, you had a candidate who lacked a message and who really struggled to connect with voters and decided to try to run to the right of Trump, to try to chip away at a Trump base that ultimately decided not to budge. But because of that, now as he's dropping out, you've got this ballot share that he did have that's not insignificant, though it certainly wasn't a winning one. But that is very likely to go to help former President Trump, especially given this endorsement, rather than Nikki Haley, just because of the core base of support that DeSantis had was very different than the coalition that Nikki Haley is trying to build. But overall, this picture, Ryan, from many of the sources that me and my colleagues talked to and dissecting sort of what went wrong here, going from the guy that was the top contender to take on former President Trump to someone who ends his campaign, as you said, there kissing the ring, Ryan.
All right. Dasha Burns, excellent reporting on the DeSantis campaign. We appreciate it so much. Let's bring in our panel now. Susan Page, the USA Today Washington bureau chief. Maria Teresa Kumar, the president and CEO of Voto Latino and an NBC News contributor, and Lanhee Chen, a former advisor to the Romney campaign and a fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. So let's dive into this. And Lanhee, I want to start with you because you are the Republican on our panel. It seemed as though there was a lot of conventional wisdom maybe a year and a half ago that Ron DeSantis was the antidote to Trump, right? He was had all the same policies as Donald Trump, but just had a different way of presenting those policies. It never materialized that way. What would you say was the reason why DeSantis wasn't able to capture that energy in the Republican Party?
Well, I think failures of concept and failures of execution. Failures of concept, really the idea that you could have a Trump light in some ways, that you could have a Trump-like candidate without some of the failings of Donald Trump. And as it turns out, people wanted Donald Trump. And particularly as the indictments piled up, I think it made Donald Trump an even more attractive candidate to the very base that probably would have supported Ron DeSantis potentially. So that was conceptually. I think executionally, we can argue about how the money was spent, where the money is spent. But because the concept may itself have been flawed from day one, I think the execution mistakes maybe matter a little bit less, that fundamentally this candidacy may have been difficult from day one. And I think if it had been run under a different set of premises, maybe the outcome would have been different. If Trump hadn't been indicted several times, maybe it would have been different. But we'll never be able to know.
Yeah, and Susan, are you surprised that it took him this short of amount of time to get behind Donald Trump, given how much animosity there was between the two of them?
Well, he understood exactly what would happen. If he didn't kiss the ring, he was going to be wrong to sanctimonious.
Yeah.
And he kissed the ring, and he was instantly a statesman that Donald Trump could embrace. And I assume that Ron DeSantis, like a bunch of other candidates, is thinking now not just about 2024. They're thinking about 2028, when Donald Trump will presumably not be a candidate for the nomination, and
Presumably.
Yes. Might be.
Yeah. So, Maria, it's now a two-person race. This is something that Nikki Haley's been asking for. But is it too little, too late? And I assume that she didn't think that this is the way the race was going to coalesce once it became a two-person race.
I think you're right. I think that what she was hoping for is to be able to demonstrate first that she could beat DeSantis solidly. She didn't. She came in third place. And now going into the New Hampshire primary, she's going to have to try to get McCain-like numbers among independents. And she's going to have to figure out, did DeSantis, the people that were going to vote for DeSantis, are they really going to vote for Nikki Haley? It doesn't look like it. And I think one of the challenges that she faces is that while she is able to demonstrate that she is different from Donald Trump, she still espouses a lot of the issues that, unfortunately, many independents do not espouse. Her stance on abortion, for example. And I think that's going to be a really tough challenge. I think that she's going into a party that has embraced Donald Trump fully. And for her to come in second place tonight, we know that, tomorrow night, will happen, but it's not enough for her to actually get a bump, I think, into South Carolina.
Can I just say one thing? I don't think this did not seem inevitable if you step back. If you go back to January 7th, 2021, it did not look inevitable that Donald Trump, the Republican Party would coalesce behind Donald Trump,
at all.
And he would be the nominee by the time we got to New Hampshire.
I mean, people deeply believed in Ron DeSantis to $150 million, and that $150 million only got him to one state. So I think that there was plenty of people, from high-dollar donors to individual donors, that believed that he was actually going to be a competitive race with Donald Trump. That just never materialized.
Well, I don't think anybody predicted that you would have these string of indictments that would make Donald Trump more attractive. And no, I mean, look,
I don't think he did either.
Well, but I mean, I don't know about that, because I think Donald Trump captured it when he said, I forgot which proceeding it was at, but he said basically, they're not coming after me, they're coming after you.
Right.
And by personalizing it for people who supported Donald Trump or who had the potential to support it, he made himself more attractive in their eyes. And I think, so he may have had some sense of it, but Ron DeSantis, I'm sure, certainly didn't, nor did his donors for that matter.
I mean, that's a risky gambit, though, isn't it, though, Susan? You're basically saying, come for me, indict me, potentially convict me, but use that as a way to fire up my base. He could end up in the White House, or he could end up in prison, right?
Well, that's the risk.
Yeah.
But in the short term, it's a political advantage. And since Donald Trump's appeal has always been the appeal of grievance, this is one more great big grievance he can cite to his supporters.
All right, let's...
And one of the things that's going to be really interesting is that they postponed today's trial to tomorrow. It's the same night as the New Hampshire, where he wants to be physically in New Hampshire. Is he going to show up to which one? To his candidacy, his nomination, sure win of New Hampshire, or is he going to show up to the courtroom? That's a flip of the coin. So.
I find it interesting that, the attacks that Donald Trump puts on his rivals, when he embodies those attacks, they never seem to stick. One of them is he continually attacks the current president for his cognitive abilities when there are examples that Donald Trump may fall short in that area. Take a listen to this over the weekend, where he mixed up Nikki Haley and Nancy Pelosi. It's a little head-scratching.
They're saying he got confused, that he was talking about something else. He was talking about Nancy Pelosi. He mentioned me multiple times in that scenario. The concern I have is, I'm not saying anything derogatory, but when you're dealing with the pressures of a presidency, we can't have someone else that we question whether they're mentally fit to do this.
Of course, this is Nikki Haley responding to Donald Trump confusing her for Nancy Pelosi. Then he had Elise Stefanik in an interview with our Ali Vitale rush to Donald Trump's defense. Lanhee, why do his supporters seem to just ignore these faux pas on the campaign trail?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of things about Donald Trump that his supporters will overlook. And some of that is unique to politics, or some of that's not unique to Donald Trump. It's just politics. But some of it is unique to Donald Trump. I think that in this case, the question will be, how many more of these are there at some point? Is there enough where people would start to say, well, I don't know. But, look, having spent a couple of days in New Hampshire and talking to folks who are supporting the former president, my sense is that his support is pretty ironclad, that even these kinds of critiques probably don't stick.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the current president. Joe Biden and the Democrats made a conscious decision to move on from New Hampshire, but yet at the last second here, they've mounted, it's not connected directly to the campaign, but somewhat running alongside this write-in effort. Maria, are you concerned at all that tomorrow night there could be a scenario by which Joe Biden loses a New Hampshire primary, maybe not physically by the number of votes that are cast, but by the perception that people have of his performance there?
I think that what we're going to see is that President Biden, he wanted to be true to South Carolina. And so there was very little lack of investment. I don't think it's going to be more of a surprise. What's going to be a surprise is if in South Carolina, he doesn't have the support and the bumps that he desperately needs in order for him to be showing that he is such a stronghold. And I think one of the things that people are, and Nikki Haley pointed this out, when you're talking about age, they're talking about not only President Biden, but they're also talking about Trump. And that is very much on the minds of a lot of voters. And we're going to see how well he does, not just tomorrow night, but more importantly in South Carolina.
And do you think it was a tactical, it was a tactical choice by Democrats to kind of broaden their base by moving to South Carolina? Was this the right year to do that, given how tight the race is?
A little personal grievance there, too, because you'll remember who did not win in Iowa and New Hampshire.
Got clobbered in New Hampshire, yeah.
So that may have been a factor, too. Listen, Democrats have long wanted to move away from Iowa and New Hampshire. Good luck moving away from New Hampshire, where state law is that you'll have the primary 2 years in advance if you have to be the first. But moving away from Iowa, I think Democrats thought it was time to do that.
I think the question will be, how much enthusiasm is there for Joe Biden? This will be a little bit of a proxy for that. And ultimately in this election, what he needs is enthusiasm. He needs his base to be enthusiastic. And we're going to see tomorrow night what the outcome is. And I think if he's able to show, look, notwithstanding not being on the ballot, if he's able to mount this successful write-in effort, I think it'll say something about the enthusiasm out there for him.
Well, it does seem, though, we are moving very close to a general election if we're not already there. Donald Trump is not the nominee yet, but he could be by this time Wednesday, right? Could the polls that show Donald Trump making ground, or even in some cases moving past Joe Biden in some of these polls, do those change once voters are presented, Maria, with the idea that he is actually the Republican nominee?
I think so. I mean, I think the biggest, what I'm watching for tomorrow night is absolutely how the independent voters are swinging. And the fact that Nikki Haley, has maybe a bump shot to be closer to John McCain, I think that's where folks should get timid. All of the work that we're doing right now involves focus groups and polling. And what we're finding is that a lot of folks that are saying, I don't really like Donald Trump, but I'm not sure if I can actually vote for Joe Biden. And we're talking about the younger set. If the younger set actually finds third parties viable, everybody talks about no labels, and they think about independent, moderate voters. No one's talking about the youth vote. And the youth vote is one of the reasons why Biden got into the White House. And the fact that many of them are saying that possibly a third party candidate that no one at this table has heard of is viable, that's something that I'm watching for, and that's something that we should be taking a closer look at.
Susan?
And, of course, you don't need to get that many votes as a third-party candidate to affect the outcome.
That's right.
You can do it with a few percentage points in a key swing state, and exactly, Jill Stein, and you've elected the other side president.
That's
right. Okay, Susan, Maria, Teresa, Lanhee, thank you guys all for being here. We appreciate it. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Still to come, we do have some breaking news out of Israel, where there is a new proposal on the table to pause the fighting in exchange for the release of all the hostages from Gaza. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We are following two pieces of breaking news in the Middle East. First, an Israeli government official tells NBC News that Israel has proposed a 2-month pause in fighting in exchange for all of the remaining hostages being held in Gaza. And at the same time, there are strikes going on right now against Houthi targets in Yemen. Let's go right to NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley, who's in Tel Aviv. So, Matt, first, tell us what we know about this offer from Israel, and has Hamas responded?
Well, we haven't heard a response from Hamas yet. We understand that this is something that was agreed upon about 10 days ago by Israeli officials. So we haven't heard from Hamas. It's unclear what they're going to say because, remember, these negotiations have been stalled for months because Hamas wanted to see a complete ceasefire if they were going to release the hostages. But this would be significant. This is a major step forward if Hamas approves this and accedes to the negotiations, because this would be the longest stretch of peace the Gaza Strip has seen, relative peace that the Gaza Strip has seen since October 7th. So if this goes forward, it would also be a big boon to Benjamin Netanyahu. Just this morning, we saw families of the hostages flooding into parliament, raiding the Knesset, Israel's parliament, a finance committee meeting, demanding that the government do more to release the hostages. There is massive frustration here in Israel that these 100 or so hostages that are still in Gaza have not been released, despite months of blistering fighting that has now killed more than 25,000 Palestinians, most of them civilians. So again, this would also kind of restrict Israel's movement here, because Israel has said that the part of this deal would involve redeploying Israeli forces outside of the main population centers in the Gaza Strip. And that would kind of tie their hands when it comes to future operations. But this does come at an ideal moment for Israel in that sense, because they have already agreed to try to scale down their offensive in the Gaza Strip to make more surgical moves against Hamas. But Hamas is still very capable. According to the Wall Street Journal recently, they've lost about 20% of their fighters, but they are still fighting on. Ryan?
All right, let's talk about the other piece of breaking news. There are strikes going on right now from the U.S. and U.K. On Houthi targets in Yemen. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the second round of strikes by the British and the U.S. in Yemen against the Houthis, who have been attacking international shipping, causing a lot of those ships to reroute. Massive inconvenience for a lot of these shipping companies, and an inconvenience that could eventually be seen in price tags in products bought from abroad in the United States. But we heard from the Houthis. They said that it doesn't matter how much the Americans and the British bomb them, and they said this just now, just as those bombs were landing, but that they would still continue their fight against Israel. So this is something that, again, we're seeing a move by the West, by Israel, by the U.S., but in this case by the U.S. and the U.K. But we still have to wait to see more of a response and see whether or not this actually works from the parties involved.
Okay, Matt Bradley with the breaking news. We appreciate that, Matt. Thank you. After the break, the Biden administration takes the battle over abortion rights to battleground Wisconsin. We're live in Waukesha County. Next, you're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Today, on the 51st anniversary of the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling, the Biden administration is launching a multi-front effort aimed at protecting reproductive rights and galvanizing voters ahead of the 2024 election. Earlier today, the president convened a meeting with his task force on reproductive health care and announced new measures that would strengthen access to contraception, as well as protect access to medicated abortions. And on the campaign front today, the Biden campaign is out with a new ad putting the issue front and center in 2024.
2 years ago, I became pregnant with a baby I desperately wanted. At a routine ultrasound, I learned that the fetus would have a fatal condition and that there was absolutely no chance of survival. In Texas, you are forced to carry that pregnancy, and that is because of Donald Trump overturning Roe v. Wade.
It comes as today in Wisconsin, Vice President Harris kicked off her nationwide tour on reproductive rights, drawing attention to efforts by Republicans to restrict access to abortion. And joining me now is NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, who is covering the vice president's trip. So, Yamiche, what do we make of the fact that Vice President Harris is kicking off this tour in Wisconsin, and what stood out to you?
Well, it's telling that the vice president came to Waukesha County, Wisconsin to launch this tour, because it was this county that former President Trump won twice. Now, in her speech pushing for abortion rights, she actually went after former President Trump. Take a listen to what she said.
The former president handpicked 3 Supreme Court justices because he intended for them to overturn Roe. He intended for them to take your freedoms. And it is a decision he brags about.
The vice president also said that Republicans might push for a national ban on abortion and that Democrats really need to build on the momentum that they have because, of course, in a number of states where we've seen abortion access issues on the ballot, the people who are in favor of abortion have won out. This was a very interesting, of course, again, that she came here and that she really was making sure that she was coming to a county in a key battleground state. Ryan?
Obviously, this is something we're going to see the vice president doing a lot of, but Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer said over the weekend that she'd like to see President Biden himself more outspoken on the issue. Can we expect more from the president as well?
I think we can expect more. Well, today we saw the administration roll out a number of initiatives aimed at expanding access to contraceptions and medication abortion using federal programs and federal departments like the Department of Labor, Treasury, Health and Human Services. We also, I think, are expecting President Biden and Vice President Harris to really continue to share the stories of women, like the ad that you saw. I talked to a woman today who said that she had an abortion at 19 and a half weeks in Wisconsin. She told me that she felt forced into that decision because her health and the health of her baby were at risk. This was a baby that was going to have a fatal defect that would not have been consistent with life, so she felt forced into that decision. So I think we're going to hear more from the administration talking about these issues because, including our NBC News poll, shows that voters see this as a key priority. They see this as a key priority for deciding which candidates to support, and Democrats believe that they can win on this issue. Ryan?
Okay, Yamiche, live from a battleground state in Wisconsin. Yamiche, thank you so much for that report. And thank you for being with us this hour. Kristen will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. And of course, she's back for the NBC News Now special election night coverage of the New Hampshire primary. That starts at 5 p.m. Eastern, so do not miss that. The news, though, continues now with Aaron McLaughlin, who's in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.